July 23, 2011. Rubicon Point, California. A group of technical divers moves along a submerged granite wall on Lake Tahoe's western side, nearly 270 feet beneath the surface. At that depth, there is no warm sunlight, no sound from the boats above, and almost no room for error. The divers are breathing specially planned gas mixtures because ordinary recreational scuba procedures are not enough down here. Their lights sweep across grey rock, narrow cracks, and empty black water. Then one beam stops. A human figure is wedged against the underwater cliff. The body is still wearing diving equipment. It has not been there for days or months. Dental records will identify the remains as Donald Christopher Windecker, a 44-year-old diver who disappeared on July 10, 1994. His partner had watched him experience trouble during their ascent and begin sinking back into the lake. A rescue attempt failed when the partner's own air supply ran low. Search crews found nothing. 17 years passed. Now Windecker has returned almost exactly where Tahoe took him, on a shelf 265 feet down. A remotely operated vehicle fitted with a mechanical claw raises him 4 days after the discovery. The cold, deep water has slowed decomposition enough that authorities can still examine the remains. That recovery should have ended one mystery. Instead, it gave physical weight to every old story about what Lake Tahoe can preserve beyond the reach of sunlight, divers, and ordinary search equipment. The legends say the bottom is crowded with the missing. The evidence does not support tales of hundreds of perfectly preserved mob victims. But the evidence does establish something quieter and more disturbing. Lake Tahoe can hold a person for 17 years and give almost no sign that they are there. The lake stretches roughly 22 miles from north to south and 12 miles across at its widest point. Its surface covers about 191 square miles. Beneath that surface are close to 40 trillion gallons of water, enough to cover the entire state of California to a depth of more than a foot. The average depth is approximately 1,000 feet. The deepest measured point reaches 1,645 feet, making Tahoe the second deepest lake in the United States. You can stand on the shore at Sand Harbor and see individual rocks through the blue water, yet most of the lake below you remains physically inaccessible. Recreational divers rarely approach even a fraction of its full depth. Light disappears. Pressure rises. Water temperatures remain cold enough to shorten safe exposure and slow biological processes. The bottom is not a flat bowl either. It contains fault scarps, sediment fields, drowned slopes, giant ripples, wrecks, discarded machinery, and cliffs that plunge farther than many skyscrapers rise. Quick second. I spend a lot of time separating what Tahoe really contains from the stories people repeat about it. If this kind of careful investigation is landing for you, hit subscribe. It costs one click, and it means a lot to me. Back to the lake. The first discovery. The lake returned its missing diver. Donald Christopher Windecker's discovery began with a flash of artificial light against rock. The technical divers who encountered him in 2011 were exploring a granite cliff off Rubicon Point when they saw what earlier searches had missed. He was not floating in open water. He had settled into the underwater terrain, where a body could remain hidden from surface crews, even when boats passed directly overhead. Authorities then had to relocate him with a remotely operated vehicle, maneuver through darkness, secure the remains with a mechanical claw, and lift them from approximately 265 feet. The conditions explain part of what happened, but not the full mythology that grew around it. Cold water can slow bacterial activity. Great depth can prevent a body from rising in the way people expect after a drowning. In some submerged remains, fats can transform into adipocere, a waxy material sometimes called grave wax, which can preserve tissue. But every case depends on temperature, oxygen, depth, clothing, scavengers, water movement, and where the body finally settles. Tahoe is not a supernatural freezer, and scientists do not claim that every person who sinks remains unchanged. Windecker was described as well-preserved, not untouched by time. That distinction matters because the famous stories go much further. For decades, Tahoe folklore has spoken of organized crime victims suspended in deep water, sometimes tied to the casino era and supposedly visible from early submersibles. No official survey has confirmed such a field of bodies. No verified photographs show it. No agency inventory records it. No names, no mapped location, not a single authenticated expedition report. During a 2025 remotely operated vehicle descent beyond 1,500 feet, organizers said they saw no bodies at all. And yet Windecker's case proves the central mechanism is real. A human being can disappear into Tahoe's underwater topography and remain undiscovered for nearly 2 decades. How many missing person cases ended not in open water, but in some narrow shelf or crevice that no camera has ever crossed? The second discovery. An entire steamship waits upright. On June 29, 2002, divers Martin McClellan and Michael Herb descended into the water off Glenbrook, Nevada, searching for a ship that had vanished from ordinary view more than 6 decades earlier. Their target was the SS Tahoe, once the most elegant passenger vessel on the lake. As their lights reached the wreck, the shape emerged gradually. Hull, deck structures, and a smokestack still recognizable in the darkness. The ship was not a scattered debris field. Much of it remained together. The SS Tahoe was launched in 1896 after its prefabricated components were transported into the Sierra and assembled beside the lake. The vessel measured about 169 feet long, carried roughly 200 passengers, and used twin propellers driven by powerful steam engines. At a time when roads around Tahoe were primitive, the ship operated like a floating railway connection, moving residents, tourists, mail, and freight between lakeside communities. Then automobiles changed the basin. Roads improved. Passenger service declined. On August 29, 1940, the Tahoe was deliberately scuttled near Glenbrook in what was intended to be a controlled, dignified sinking. Plans called for the vessel to settle in shallower water where future visitors might view it. Instead, it moved down the slope and came to rest hundreds of feet beneath the surface, beyond the safe range of ordinary divers. When McClellan and Herb reached it in 2002, the dive itself became a milestone in high-altitude technical exploration. Tahoe's surface sits more than 6,200 feet above sea level, which complicates decompression because divers leave the water into thinner atmospheric pressure than they would at the ocean. The wreck lies around 360 to 400 feet deep, depending on which section is measured. At that depth, a diver has minutes to inspect a structure that would take hours to walk through on land, followed by a long, carefully staged ascent. Researchers can explain how the vessel sank, but important details remain beyond easy reach. Its deep water preservation is unusually good. Yet currents, corrosion, collapsing wood, and sediment are slowly changing it. No continuous archaeological team watches the ship. Most of its interior has never been systematically documented by human divers. Small, remotely operated vehicles have recorded the exterior, but doorways and enclosed spaces present entanglement hazards. The Tahoe is still down there right now, upright in darkness, with portions of its superstructure and funnel surviving long after the company that built it disappeared. What remains, sealed inside the cabins and lower compartments that no diver has safely entered. The third discovery. Tahoe has a drowned fleet. In the 1990s, California State Parks archaeologists began documenting unusual shapes beneath Emerald Bay. Divers following the shoreline encountered wooden boats, launches, and barges sitting in clear water, as though someone had abandoned a marina and allowed the lake to rise over it. Some were known locally, others had never been publicly mapped. In 2018, the state finally revealed several sites as part of California's first maritime heritage underwater trail. The collection dates mainly to the early 20th century, when Emerald Bay Resort drew visitors into one of the lake's most sheltered coves. Boats carried guests, fishing parties, supplies, and construction materials. Barges supported lakeside building work, including activity during the era when Vikingsholm was constructed in 1929. When vessels became damaged, obsolete, or too expensive to maintain, owners often scuttled them. Wood that would have rotted quickly in a field settled instead into cold, fresh water. Today, the trail includes dive locations between roughly 10 and 60 feet deep. One vessel is a wooden fishing boat with a built-in live bait well between the seats. Other sites include launches and large rectangular barges. State archaeologists describe the group as the largest and most diverse known collection of sunken small watercraft still resting in its original location in the United States. But no complete paperwork survives for every hull. There are no perfect ownership records, no full list of sinking dates, and no detailed explanation for each final voyage. Archaeologists can compare construction styles, fasteners, dimensions, and resort photographs, but some identities remain uncertain. The boats are close enough for trained divers to visit, yet they exist in a strange borderland between artifact and wreckage. Touching or removing pieces can destroy information that has survived for almost a century. Imagine descending through Emerald Bay on a quiet morning. Sunlight fractures above you. The bottom appears. Then the outline of a boat materializes, with its bow still pointed into the bay, as though its passengers stepped ashore yesterday and never returned. These vessels were probably sunk deliberately, but why were so many left in one concentrated place, and how many unrecorded hulls remain outside the marked trail? The fourth discovery. The bottom records a mega tsunami. The discovery did not begin with divers, it began with sound. During sonar surveys of Lake Tahoe, geologists sent acoustic pulses into the water and built images from the returning echoes. Near McKinney Bay on the western shore, the lakebed did not look normal. A huge section of submerged terrain appeared torn away. Across the basin lay a deposit so extensive that ordinary erosion could not explain it. Researchers had found evidence of one of the largest known landslides in the lake's history. The McKinney Bay slide displaced an estimated 6 cubic kilometers of material. That is not a collapsing hillside measured in truckloads. It is a mass of sediment and rock large enough to bury a major downtown beneath hundreds of feet of debris. The slide traveled across the lakebed and generated waves that models place on the order of 100 meters, or approximately 330 feet, near the source. The event occurred thousands of years ago, with dating estimates generally falling in the late Pleistocene or early Holocene, roughly between 10,000 and 20,000 years before the present. The wave did not leave a written account, but it left physical geometry. Sonar mapping revealed giant sediment waves and channels. Boulder ridges around the lake may record water moving with enough force to rearrange glacial debris. Deposits allow researchers to place the catastrophe within a broad time window, but not on a precise calendar date. Science can reconstruct the aftermath more confidently than the trigger. An earthquake is a leading possibility because active faults cut through the Tahoe Basin, but no instrument recorded the event. Researchers cannot say exactly which fault moved, how the slope failed, or whether smaller collapses happened first. They also cannot guarantee that the same sequence will repeat in the same way. The lake is enclosed, meaning wave energy cannot simply escape into an open ocean. It rebounds from shorelines and interacts with bays, shelves, and cliffs. You are standing at Tahoe City when it happens. The first sign may not be a towering wave. It may be the water withdrawing, docks dropping, and boats settling strangely against their lines. Then the displaced lake returns. Modern roads, homes, marinas, and beaches occupy low ground around the basin. The ancient deposit is still visible beneath them, like a warning written in sediment. Tell me in the comments, before this investigation, had you ever heard that Lake Tahoe contains evidence of a wave potentially hundreds of feet high? And if the lake produced one mega tsunami, what exactly would tell us the countdown to the next slope failure had begun? The fifth discovery. A cliff drops 1,400 feet. When researchers assembled modern bathymetric maps of Tahoe, they found a landscape more violent than the calm surface suggests. Sonar traced an underwater escarpment associated with the State Line Fault. From the shallower margin, the terrain drops approximately 1,400 feet into the basin. Nearby, the deepest measured region reaches 1,645 feet. Along other fault zones, mapping revealed giant ripple marks, some spaced about 50 meters apart. The discovery moment came line by line. A survey vessel crossed the lake, while instruments measured the travel time of sound. Each pass added another strip of bottom. On the screen, slopes sharpened into cliffs, and smooth plains broke into enormous repeating ridges. Features that would look modest on a small chart became staggering at full scale. A 1,400-foot underwater drop is roughly equivalent to placing Chicago's Willis Tower below the surface and still having much of the building submerged. Geologists know the Tahoe Basin formed through faulting and crustal movement over millions of years. They can identify the Incline Village Fault, West Tahoe Dollar Point Fault, and State Line Fault system. What remains uncertain is the exact behavior of those structures over human timescales. Faults do not move on a schedule people can feel. Long quiet periods can hide accumulating strain. Sediment covers older ruptures. Landslides erase or distort evidence from earlier earthquakes. One especially unsettling finding is that the lakebed sediment may be nearly twice as thick as the water above it in places. Tahoe is 1,645 feet deep at the water column's maximum, but beneath the bottom lies an even deeper archive of mud, volcanic material, organic remains, ash, and earthquake disturbance. Much of the basin's history is not exposed. It is buried. No diver has visually inspected every meter of the cliff. No camera grid covers every ledge. No archaeological survey has cleared the sediment at its base. Sonar tells us the wall exists, but sonar cannot identify every small object resting against it. When Windecker disappeared, this type of terrain concealed him for 17 years. So what has fallen from boats, settlements, aircraft, or shorelines and come to rest on those inaccessible ledges? And how many discoveries are not missing because they are gone, but because they are sitting halfway down a 1,400-foot wall where almost nobody can reach them? The sixth discovery. Millions of shells invaded the sand. In 2002, researchers examining Tahoe's southeastern shoreline detected Asian clams in the lake. The animals were small, often hidden beneath the sediment, and easy for a casual swimmer to miss. Scientists collected bottom samples and began finding the clams at depths from about 5 to 100 feet, some buried as much as 7 inches below the surface. Then the numbers became disturbing. In heavily affected areas, densities reached more than 6,000 clams per square meter. Picture a square of lakebed, only 3 feet by 3 feet, holding thousands of living filter feeders beneath the sand. The clams alter nutrient cycles as they consume particles and release waste. Their shells accumulate on the bottom. Under certain conditions, the nutrients they concentrate can support bright mats of filamentous algae over beaches that once appeared nearly sterile. The baffling question was not simply what they were, but how far they had already spread before anyone noticed. Asian clams do not announce their arrival with a single dramatic animal. They establish quietly, reproduce beneath the sediment, and appear in monitoring samples after the invasion is already underway. Boats, bait containers, and transported water are possible pathways, but reconstructing the original introduction is nearly impossible after the fact. There was no witness, no recorded release, no exact date. Researchers have experimented with bottom barriers designed to suffocate clam beds by cutting off oxygen. The method can kill large concentrations in controlled areas, but treating every occupied patch of a 191 square mile lake is not realistic. Remove one colony and others may remain beneath nearby sand. Leave dead shells behind and the altered habitat persists. The unsettling part is how invisible the invasion can look from above. You can stand knee-deep in transparent water and see what appears to be clean, pale sediment. A few inches below your feet may be a dense layer of organisms that did not evolve in Tahoe and cannot simply be called back. Scientists can measure the clams, map them, and suppress limited populations. They still cannot identify the precise moment the first one arrived, or guarantee that the lake can ever be returned to its earlier biological state. How many ecological changes begin in Tahoe's shallows years before the human eye finally recognizes them? The seventh discovery. The new invader can clone itself. In 2023, field workers collected tiny snails from the south shore near the mouth of the Upper Truckee River. At first glance, the animals were easy to underestimate. New Zealand mud snails can be only a few millimeters long. They resemble dark grains caught among plants and sediment. Experts examined the specimens, and laboratory DNA analysis confirmed the identification. New Zealand mud snails had entered Lake Tahoe. This species has already spread through western waterways, including sections of the Truckee River downstream. Females can reproduce without males through parthenogenesis, effectively producing clonal offspring. A single snail can begin a new population. Under favorable conditions, densities in invaded waterways can become enormous, allowing the snails to consume algae and other resources while offering little nutritional value to fish that eat them. The discovery created an immediate mystery. Investigators could confirm where the snails were found, but not exactly how they arrived. Did they move upstream through connected water? Did mud containing snails cling to fishing gear, boots, a kayak, or a boat? Were they present elsewhere in the lake before sampling happened to catch them near the river mouth? The source pathway remains unresolved. Officials responded with surveys, public warnings, and expanded clean, drain, dry messaging. But this is not an invader that can be removed one animal at a time. They are too small, too numerous, and too easily overlooked. Chemical treatment would risk harming Tahoe's native ecosystem. Physical removal cannot sift an entire shoreline. Once a self-cloning species spreads across a lake of this scale, eradication may be impossible. That is the eerie balance of Tahoe's clarity. The water lets you see farther than in most lakes, but visibility creates confidence that is not always deserved. Something can be present in huge numbers and still remain nearly invisible, because each individual is smaller than your fingernail. The DNA result answered the first question. Yes, the snails were here. It opened the more serious one. By the time science confirms an organism this small, how much of the invasion has already happened beyond the sampling site? The eighth discovery. The deepest water stopped turning over. Every winter, instruments lowered from research boats measure Tahoe's temperature, oxygen, nutrients, and density from the surface toward the bottom. Scientists have watched a process known as deep water mixing, when cold surface water becomes dense enough to sink and circulate oxygen downward. In a healthy cycle, the lake can overturn to extraordinary depths. Then the pattern weakened. On February 18, 2022, measurements showed mixing had reached only about 328 feet, or 100 meters, the second shallowest value in the long-term record. That left more than 1,300 feet of deeper water largely isolated from direct surface renewal. In March 2023, conditions reversed, and Tahoe mixed to roughly 1,476 feet. The lake had moved from an unusually shallow event to an almost complete turnover in about a year. The discovery occurs through profiles rather than one visible object. A sensor package descends on a cable, transmitting small changes in temperature and chemistry. On a graph, the boundary between layers appears clean. In the water itself, you would see nothing. You could paddle across the lake while an enormous, invisible separation divides the water beneath you. Scientists understand the basic physics. Cold water sinks, wind adds energy. Differences in temperature and density determine whether the lake remains stratified or mixes. But the timing varies, and long-term warming can make complete turnover less frequent. Researchers have documented periods when Tahoe did not fully mix for years. The consequences reach the bottom. Deep water receives less oxygen, while nutrients that accumulate below may later be carried upward and stimulate algae when mixing finally occurs. This creates an uncomfortable overlap. The same deep cold that preserves wrecks and sometimes slows decomposition also depends on circulation to maintain ecological balance. If the deepest water becomes increasingly isolated, its chemistry changes quietly, beyond sight. In 2012, the entire 1,645-foot water column mixed. In 2022, mixing stopped near 328 feet. The start depths differ. The endpoint differs by more than 1,300 feet. Researchers can explain the forces involved, but cannot forecast each future winter with certainty or say exactly how the ecosystem will respond if full mixing becomes rare. The bottom looks motionless, but the lake is breathing. What happens when that breath no longer reaches its deepest chambers? The ninth discovery. The abyss contains drifting life. September 5, 2025, a custom remotely operated vehicle named Deep Emerald, or EMI, enters Lake Tahoe while thousands of people watch a live stream. Its fiber optic tether pays out behind it. Thrusters keep the machine stable. LED lights illuminate a narrow cone ahead of a 4K camera as the vehicle descends beyond ordinary diving range. At 1,574 feet, the bottom appears. There is no sunken city, no wall of skeletons, no monster moving through the frame. Instead, the camera shows a dark sediment plain filled with particles that drift through the light like snow in outer space. The emptiness is almost more unsettling than a dramatic object would have been. At that pressure, the machine is moving through a part of Tahoe that only a tiny number of people have ever observed in real time. Researchers explained that the bottom is not biologically dead. Material from the watershed settles there and is processed within deep water ecosystems. Scientists have identified specialized plant beds and organisms adapted to low light, cold temperatures, and limited food. Some feed on bacteria and algae, becoming part of a chain that ultimately supports fish higher in the water column. But the dive also exposed how little continuous observation exists. A 30-minute camera journey can reveal only a narrow strip of a lakebed covering almost 200 square miles. The ROV had previously encountered human debris, including tires and an eerily intact birthday balloon. During the livestream, organizers emphasized what they did not see: no bodies and no evidence of the legendary creature known as Tessie. Absence mattered. The most repeated Tahoe legends failed to appear when a camera finally reached the abyss. Yet science did not close the case on the lake's bottom. Researchers still lack comprehensive high-resolution visual coverage. Sediment can bury objects. Steep terrain prevents straight survey lines. Clear water near the surface does not mean clear visibility at 1,500 feet, where a vehicle's lights illuminate particles and little else. A single camera could pass 20 feet from an object and never record it. This was called the first publicly live-streamed journey to Tahoe's bottom, more than a century after powered vessels began crossing the lake. Think about that timeline. People photographed Tahoe from shore in the 1800s. Aircraft mapped it from above. Satellites measured its snowpack. Millions visited its beaches, but only in 2025 could the public watch live as a machine reached 1,574 feet. Tell me in the comments, were you more surprised by what the camera found, or by how little of the bottom humanity has actually seen? The machine reached the abyss, but it did not map the abyss. What lies one camera width beyond the edge of that recorded path? Lake Tahoe's deepest mystery is not one monster, one wreck, or one body. It is the distance between visibility and knowledge. The lake appears open. From the shore, you can watch sunlight penetrate water so clear that boats seem suspended above the bottom. That clarity encourages the illusion that Tahoe reveals itself. But the visible edge is only a thin band around a basin averaging 1,000 feet deep. Below that band, a diver remained hidden for 17 years. A 169-foot steamship waited until technical explorers reached it in 2002. A deliberately drowned fleet survived in Emerald Bay. Sonar uncovered the scar of a landslide capable of generating a colossal wave. Bathymetry traced a cliff roughly 1,400 feet high. Sediment concealed thousands of invasive clams per square meter. DNA exposed a self-cloning snail that had arrived without a witnessed entrance. Instruments showed the lake's deep circulation weakening, then suddenly reaching almost to the bottom again. And in 2025, a camera finally touched the abyss and found an ecosystem moving through darkness. None of this requires exaggeration. The documented reality is powerful enough. The legends of perfectly preserved gangsters remain legends. Tessie has not been verified. There is no credible evidence of an ancient city beneath Tahoe. But dismissing those stories does not make the lake ordinary. It makes the genuine discoveries more important, because they tell us what evidence looks like when myth is removed. The SS Tahoe still rests off Glenbrook. The Emerald Bay boats can still be visited by trained divers. The McKinney Bay slide remains written across the bottom. Fault scarps still descend into black water. Invasive species continue reproducing beneath beaches crowded with tourists. Deep water sensors are recording changes now, not in some distant geological past. Lake Tahoe has not finished revealing itself. We have simply reached the point where our machines can begin asking better questions. So the next time you stand beside that blue water, remember that you are looking across a flooded landscape deeper than most people will ever travel, layered with shipwrecks, fault lines, buried sediment, lost objects, and living systems that operate without sunlight. The lake does not need to hide anything deliberately. Depth does the hiding for it. And if one narrow beam of light can recover a man after 17 years, expose a steamship after 62, or reveal the scar of a prehistoric tsunami after thousands, what is still waiting in the darkness just beyond where we have looked? Share this investigation with someone who has seen Lake Tahoe from the surface and ask them whether they have ever considered what may be looking back from below.